All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining this workshop. This is the second workshop for track 3, just focused on catalyzing meaningful adaptation, and it's entitled Adaptation Shark Tank: Collaborative Project Conceptualization. We have a really exciting interactive agenda planned for you all. So again, really glad that everyone's able to join us bright and early Thursday morning. My name is Julia Kim. I'm with the Local Government Commission. LGC is hosting this CAF series. I'm supported by Kelsey Wolfcloud, who's on the line with us, as well as John Vandervoort. Definitely feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any questions or if you're encountering any technical issues as part of this workshop. And I'm also joined by Ben, Melody, Ignacio, and Juliet as the co-facilitators for this track. So just to get us started, I just wanted to ground us in the group norms that we adopted as a track. So just a reminder for folks, just try to stay engaged, practice compassionate listening, take space and make space, be courageous, and expect and accept a lack of closure. And I'll share the link to our group norms in just a moment. There are also a set of reminders in terms of how to participate in Zoom, just recognizing how many people we have joined with us today. And for folks who joined us for our first workshop, just wanted to, you'll remember the exercise we ran through, but for those who missed the first workshop, I wanted to provide a super quick recap. It was highly interactive. We broke out into breakout rooms to identify specific barriers as well as potential solutions and ideas for overcoming these barriers related to implementation. And we looked at 4 key adaptation pathways: social resilience, built infrastructure, natural and working lands, and landscape level adaptation. We also ran through an exercise, a visioning exercise, looking at ICARP, the ICARP TAC vision for climate resilience to see what stood out, what was missing. And here we are proposing an updated vision statement to ground the work of this track. So I won't read this fully. Many of you might be familiar with this since this is the ICARP TAC vision. In pink is what you'll see some language we added based on what we heard through the Mentimeter exercise. And then this section, we just reordered the list to deprioritize the economy and focus more so on people. So a lot of comments around community collaboration and equity inclusion and community-led initiatives and capacity building. This is the second part of the vision statement, and there's a lot of agreement in terms of natural systems adjusting and focusing on all people. So no changes on this second part of the vision statement. So hopefully this is helpful in terms of grounding our work together. And with that, I'll pause. I totally forgot to invite folks to introduce themselves via chat. So I would love to see who's in the room with us. So please feel free to introduce yourself through the chat function. You can share your name, organization, location, and a land acknowledgement if you are compelled to do so, and anything else you'd like to share. And so here is the link for the group norms for our track. And with that, I will turn it over to Ben to kind of walk through what we have in store for all of you today.
Thanks, Julia. So yeah, I'm gonna walk us through the breakouts that we have planned for today. So the way we'll do it is we're gonna set up 4 groups, and you all will have the option of which group that you'd like to join. So we'll let you do that. Each group is gonna focus on a different scenario, and each scenario is focused on one primary climate impact and a specific community type, and I'll walk through those for you. And the goal here is that each group is gonna build out a project concept that can produce meaningful outcomes. And what we really want to restructure the discussion to address key challenges that sort of builds off of what we talked about in the workshop, and also brings forward some of the solutions that you all identified. So we want to really put those challenges and solutions into action in the context of different scenarios. Each of your breakouts is going to have a facilitator. And in terms of the project concept, you can pick a near or medium or long-term time scale. And in terms of the project itself, it can either be one action or a series of actions or a combination of actions. But the hope here is to have one cohesive and coherent project. So if we could go to if you could pull up the slide, Julia, I'm going to walk us through the scenarios.
Julia's multitasking right now, so.
Okay.
Sorry, give me one moment. I'm getting that and launching that in just a second here. Okay.
Okay, here we go. So let me run through these quickly. The first scenario is extreme heat. So we have a progressive urban community. It's highly diverse in terms of race and ethnicity, languages spoken, and socioeconomic status, with a large houseless population. The second scenario is focused on drought. So you have a politically diverse county with a mix of urban, suburban, and rural communities, a highly active and engaged CBO network, and the largest agriculture sector in the state. The third scenario is wildfire. So you have a rural community with many tribes and native communities, tourism-based economy, and an older, lower income population with limited access to data and service. And then finally, a sea level rise scenario, the highly developed coastal community with beaches providing recreational value and a service-driven economy supported by a large undocumented population. So think about those a little bit. Think a bit about which one you'd like to kind of dive into today. I'll talk through so the way we'll do this is we're going to have several rounds of this Shark Tank exercise. And the first one is really building out the conceptualization of the project. So sort of focusing on the solution, we're going to have the facilitators run you all through a series of prompts to really kind of add some detail to it, and sort of think through how is this project actually going to come together, and what are the different considerations that need to be made. We'll spend a decent amount of time on that, about 40 minutes. We'll come back, and then we're going to throw a curveball at you that was, TBD. But we'll kind of walk through that and then see how the group wants to respond to that. Basically, a shift in the sort of the climate, as it were, and then how do we want to respond to that with the project that you've conceptualized. And then finally, we're going to do a little role playing and sort of asking folks to wear different hats as it relates to implementing these projects, and think about kind of the considerations as they relate to those different roles. And we'll wrap up with each group is going to kind of make a pitch for their scenario and what they came up with and how they adapted and how it relates to all these different roles. It'll be just really interesting to see what everyone comes up with. We're really looking forward to it. And when we get into the breakout rooms, each of the facilitators, I think, provide a little bit more detail in terms of exactly what we're doing, but hopefully this provides some high level context for you all, what we're getting into this morning. So I think that is it for at a high level. So I think, Julia, I think folks can think about which of these scenarios rooms you want to be in. And we're going to break out here, within a couple minutes.
I'm going to go ahead and leave the slide up so folks can see the different scenarios that we have. Just as a heads up, we're hoping to have each group be roughly of similar sizes. So once folks move into the rooms that you're interested in, your facilitator might ask for a couple volunteers to move to a room that might have fewer participants. So just a heads up there. And I'll go ahead and launch the breakouts in just a moment. And I'll be here in the main room if folks have any questions.
Thanks, Julia. So I hope everyone came up with some pretty neat ideas for their project and solution. I know Our group had a lot of productive discussion. So welcome back. We're gonna be launching back into the same breakout groups to continue refining the project concept. But first, we have a curveball scenario to present. And so our curveball is that political winds have changed and climate change is no longer a priority, greater focus on the economy and public health. And so we want to acknowledge how adaptation is a near, medium, and long-term effort. And as adaptation practitioners, we need to remain resilient to changes that could affect our work. I feel like we've all experienced this at some point in our careers. And so we're going to go back and we're going to have about 20 minutes to discuss and refine this project concept, add some notes to help address this present curveball that we've thrown at you. And then we'll reconvene at about 10, is it 10:40, Julia? Yeah, about 10:40. And then we're going to have about 3 or 4 minutes to pitch our project concept. So all the groups will have some opportunity to share their project ideas. And so with that, we'll go ahead and go back into breakouts. Hope everyone got more coffee.
Yes, so we'll, just as a heads up, so everyone's going to go back to the same breakout groups. You can use that time to continue refining your project concept, responding to this curveball challenge. There's also a role-playing exercise that breakout facilitators will introduce for the final 20 minutes of the breakout discussion. And as Melody noted, we'll reconvene around 10:40 and folks will have just a few minutes to pitch their project concepts. So Ben, was there anything you wanted to add or other facilitators before we relaunch breakouts?
No, I don't think so.
All right, y'all enjoy. All right, welcome back, folks. Hopefully that was a fun exercise. Again, very excited to hear the project concept pitches. Ignacio, I'll turn it over to you to help facilitate this portion.
Thank you and welcome back. We had a very nice breakout. Lots of, and we were probably the smallest group, but looking forward to everyone's comments here. So in this next few minutes, each group will make their pitch on what their program is. We will start with, let's see, the Jamboard. Drought is number 2. Who's number 1? Number 1 is Extreme Heat, Drought. Then Sea Level Rise is last. So Wildfire would be number 3. So make your pitch. You have a few minutes to talk about, why your solution is the best solution that will deliver, deliver us from whatever climate change challenge we have. And after that, so go ahead. Let's see. Who was number 1? Extreme Heat. And please, the speaker, identify yourself.
Sorry. Hi, it's Juliet. I was double muted.
All right.
Again, as always. Hi there, Juliet Hart with OPR. And yeah, we had a really great conversation in our group focused on extreme heat. And are we supposed to do this Shark Tank style? I don't know if I can.
Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Okay. Well, so if you go to the first slide, you'll see there were a lot of really great solutions. Thank you, Julia. There were a lot of really great solutions that we were talking about. And we are in an urban community that's highly diverse, in terms of race and ethnicity, languages spoken, socioeconomic status, but we have a large houseless population. So when we were looking at these solutions, we were seeing a lot of really important ones, but also not necessarily addressing the houseless population ones. So we started circling around the idea of cooling centers, and what if it's not just a cooling center, but it's also a resilience center. So if you go to the next slide, and we thought with the resilience center, it really allows us to tackle a lot of the things that we were seeing as the challenges. So the key components was that the resilience center needed to focus on many different benefits. It would be a cooling center, but it would also be a place for backup charging, a community gathering place, a place to provide services. We talked a lot about the mental health component of anyone going through extreme heat. It's challenging for all of us, no matter housed, unhoused, whatever your socioeconomic status. So combining that with some of the opportunities for mental health and engagement. We talked about accessibility in all forms, being able to get there, having people in your communities that are speaking the language that you're all speaking, access to water, et cetera. With the focus on the houseless population, we talked a lot about this idea of transitional housing. That's sort of this bridge between being on the street or being put into a place where they may not be ready for that yet. And so finding this kind of transitional way of outdoor living, indoor living, but having that be a safe space. And we saw that that had a lot of benefits, from reducing negative health impacts to increasing education on heat solutions, et cetera. Given the political change, we found that we didn't really have to change all that much. The resilience centers are just that. It's a place for people to be resilient. And so, we don't need to talk specifically about climate. The impacts from heat are here today. You don't have to be a climate scientist to agree with that. Generally, most climate deniers, I don't know if they agree that things are hot, but I think that it's hard to deny. So we didn't feel like we really needed to change what we were doing all that much. But in terms of thinking about COVID, what we grappled with was, could this also be a place where people could get tested or get vaccinations? And how would we do that in a way that didn't necessarily push people away or alienate people? But maybe this is a place where we could be also doing some occupational retraining for the long haul COVID cases, folks that are going to have to think about it, maybe temporarily at least, a different career, because maybe the work that they were doing before is not something that can be possible now. And then if you go to the next slide, we're trying to think about all the different angles of all this. The engagement stays the same throughout. We really wanted this to be, because it's a resilience center that's rooted in the community, we felt it was really important that we needed to be first partnering with our key trusted community-based organizations and outreach through resident leaders. And so through that lens, that would be the place that you can have more of this kind of engagement that allows people to feel safe to come to this place. Because we've heard a lot that people don't want to go to a cooling center. They want to be safe in their homes. So if you're fortunate enough to have a home and the resources to be able to do that, that's great. But thinking about the houseless population, they don't have that luxury. And so how do we make this a place that really is welcoming and supports all their various needs? In terms of funding, from both the pro-climate, anti-climate, government style, we really focused on the making the case that this saves money, right? Like reduction of health costs, insurance costs, lives lost, et cetera, all of that, the money being placed into developing these resilience centers is money saved on the other side of all this. And so a lot of our metrics focused around, I lost my train of thought, the cost effectiveness of different extreme heat mitigations. We talked a lot about research and how we can use these opportunities in a non-intrusive, non-extractive way to also learn and then maybe empower the residents or the people in the community that are accessing the center to go out and be their kind of climate action squad that's also helping us not gather information, but learn more about who are the people that need to have the attention focused to them, who needs AC, making sure that the community is rallying together to support each other during these natural hazards, not just only climate-induced hazards. So that was my attempt to sum it up. I welcome my group. I don't know if we have time, but hopefully that was within the 3 to 4 minute window.
Thank you. So Clay, thank you, Clay. Clay, you're muted.
I was in a room with a few others talking about drought issues and how we would want to deal with those issues coming up. And so here we see a number of items. The yellow ones are some of the items that didn't make it to the next phase. We chose to focus on a number of items that would try and get us to a bigger way of thinking about water efficiency and how to roll that out community-wide. And really, drought is an ongoing and long-term problem, but it's also got short-term consequences. And so we went back and forth on how to talk about those and how to deal with both those short-term and long-term consequences. And so we explored a number of things. You can also see there were a few things that we didn't seem particularly viable, either from a things that we thought just weren't really tolerable, and other things that regionally might not be a solution, desalination being one and fracking being another one. And then let's see, as we move on to the next slide, past those sample solutions, we tried to take some of those ones we highlighted, kind of pull them into what our conceptual approach was, and we found that it was more of a coalition building exercise. And so our coalition focused on silo busting and agriculture specifically. And one of the things that we wanted to do was measure things through social impact, consider using market-based strategies to really think of things in terms of an ecosystem kind of approach of the resources are here, how do we distribute them, make sure everyone's needs are met. So not necessarily just a straight market capitalism approach, but market in terms of a shared group of users that is using a shared group of resources. And you can see some of the things that are highlighted for short-term rollout, like using smart water meters as part of our way of dealing with things, being aware of social impacts, conducting workforce and education, and talking about helping that transition to crop types and water usage that might be more of what we consider sustainable. And then other things that we thought might have co-benefits, like using agrivoltaics to really talk about both energy use as well as addressing some of our water needs. And then we tried to basically take these and look at it both from a time frame and an impact time frame, so that we could get to the next slide as we looked at those and broke those out by our management strategies and our funding strategies, and then the way that we would monitor things. And so we really talked about, under management and partnership, what some of the goals were and how we looked at things. And one of those things is we didn't feel like water, because it touches so many things, is really an individual solutions kind of an issue. And so we did think that there were a number of opportunities where we could work on co-benefits, whether that's going for public health associated with water quality, whether that's things like COVID and the way that it impacts farmers market and the growers that are involved with things, which is still, this is very ag focused in the way that we looked at water and the opportunities for doing water management. And then we just kind of jumbled a number of things into that bigger sticky under engagement and partnership. But when we went into funding and finance, we talked about things like using that market-based approach, although there would be some aspects of that that are regulatory, where that coalition is really going to be advocating for or somehow requiring, depending on the mechanism, water monitoring. So we really know the water usage that's going on, that we get data that we can continue using, and then having things like perhaps a revolving loan fund or a capital assistance program that's targeted on a water feature. And one of the examples that was brought up is Ventura County has both a water market approach and as well as a grant program that's available for water efficiency, basically switching from sprinklering to things like drip irrigation, and getting some of those efficiencies that way. And then also reaching out to those bigger funding dollars and making sure that those go into places where we really think they should be directed, and using that coalition as a voice for making sure those funds hopefully are going from federal and state locations into projects that really have the impacts we're hoping for those that need it most, like our farm worker community and our small farms and things like that. And then I would leave by saying that we also thought that there are going to be different tactics used for short term, what we considered emergency needs, versus long-term needs. And those are the ones that really are working on moving the ball forward on managing water efficiently, particularly in that agricultural sector. And if anyone from my group's got anything to add, I would say, please do so, Ignacio or Kim or Paul or Eugene.
Yeah, I guess what I'd like to add is really, it is transitioning from an existing system to a future system that's sustainable. And so there are a lot of intersecting parts. And so it needs a transition plan to be really well mapped out, and it will take time to implement.
Hi, this is a comment from outside the group. Hi, Paul, that was a great comment. And this is Daniel Santiano. And what I imagine, having been to other countries where they have more of a top-down sort of approach with their natural resources, is there needs to be a revisiting of water rights. And it seems like, there's such intricacies with, this is my property, I can drill as deep as I want, but, to feed my almonds, 1 gallon of water per almond. But things are not sustainable, and if left up to the traditional systems, things are not going to change. So how then do we have that paradigm shift with administering water rights?
Before we leave the topic of drought, I make a quick comment. I attended a meeting at Cali, PA a while back where they were kicking off a study on the impact of drought on mental health issues. And they wanted to study it because it had not been well studied in the past. I haven't seen the outcome of that work, but there were a surprising number of issues that they highlighted. And I suspect that's an issue that should be addressed with other climate change effects as well.
Thank you, Drought Group. We're running out of, we might end up bleeding over the 11 a.m. mark, but I mean, these have been so great to listen into. So we'll keep this line open until we hear from everybody, so we catch it in the recording. So let's move on to the Wildfire Group.
Okay, I'm going to walk us through the Wildfire Group, and I'll try to be brief with the time, but just want to get through the key points. So what we have in blue here is sort of the main 5 pillars of our solution here for wildfire. So the first is and you can kind of see in the yellow comments, those are sort of all the things that could be part of that. So prescribed fire, controlled burns, cultural burning in partnership with tribes, really to sort of look at reducing fire risk. As we go to the right, we had planning around the built environment, designating buffer zones, development restrictions, and then thinking about how to optimize that buffer either for tourist attraction, recreation, things like that to bring other benefits. We talked a lot about evacuation and just recognizing that there's elderly folks, not all of them have cars, they're low income. So evacuation on a couple different levels in terms of programming, what vehicles people have of their own or are kind of shared to get people out, and then really making sure we're prioritizing these vulnerable populations. So that's the evacuation piece. We also talked about it would be important to protect the folks in their own homes. So that includes hardening for homes, having resilient airspaces for when the smoke is really bad, and just generally making those spaces defensible, in light of the risk from wildfire and smoke that comes with it. And then finally, a focus on the tourism education and making sure that the folks who are visitors to the town really understand the risks, how to be safe, and to the extent that there's any way to kind of leverage that and teach people about it, then that's a good way to get that knowledge shared. So let's go to the next slide. We some of this is I'll just touch on this a little bit, but just thinking through the benefits, we certainly first and foremost is just protecting life and health, and then property to the extent possible. Having a healthy ecosystem that can survive fires and be resilient, preserving recreation and jobs. I think jobs in particular are going to be really important in this community. Having mobility options for folks that are affordable and safe, and they're also known. Infilling, building in and preserving that buffer to protect the community. So let's go to the next slide. So just a couple thoughts here on engagement. Again, the engagement part is going to be really, really important. So both in terms of getting information out to the homeowners and actually going to their doors, making sure they understand what resources are available and how to access them, setting up partnerships just to support the sharing of information and resources, making sure that everyone has some sort of way of being connected with. So creating lots of different partnerships so folks know both in advance how to get support in both in events who they can be going to get what they need to be safe. In terms of funding, we certainly talked a bit about different taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, finding a way again to leverage money from tourism to support some of this kind of work around resilience. And then looking at the state budget. I mean, this is going to be, an issue in California for the foreseeable future. So it's going to have to get, not all of it's going to come from local sources. So we have to find a way to tap into those state resources. And then monitoring is just, data collection and looking at like, how are we doing, getting the community members involved in that to sort of be the eyes on the ground of how it's going. And then looking at, to the extent that we have programs around retrofitting or different vehicles, like how many are there and how are the increases looking? Let's go to the first page again. I just want to touch quickly on the curveball here. And if climate change is deprioritized, what could that mean? It could mean that, there could be fewer federal resources, for example. That could change the dynamics around what's available for controlled burns, vegetation management. It might not be as popular as it could be in other times. So the funding could dry up. There could be less focus on science and research. There could also be stress on limiting development because the development can support the economy, which is really important. So that's something we need to think about. We also did think about, well, what could be opportunities and recognizing, thinking about COVID, that smoke magnifies health risks from COVID, that's something that's going to need to be addressed. So I think we can kind of latch that on as a co-benefit that would work for fire and also for COVID. Also looking at the reality that with fire comes added flooding, mudslides, which addresses water quality. So you kind of get into all these other public safety, access to drinking water issues that need to be addressed if you're talking about climate change or not. So that has to be addressed. And then, tourism, COVID is impacting tourism quite a bit. So, and just generally tourism directly relates to the economy. So I think that there's always going to be an emphasis on that. So I'll leave it at that. If anyone in the group wants to weigh in quickly in the chat, go ahead. But we had a great conversation.
All right. Sea level rise. And thanks to those who are hanging on. Really appreciate it. I know we're running over.
So many great ideas in so little time. Okay, so our group had sea level rise, and after looking at some of these sample solutions identified from the first workshop, we decided that we wanted, of course, my dog's barking. We decided we wanted to concentrate on protecting the beaches, the context of the scenario, by implementing a living shoreline project, but in the context of evaluating vulnerability in different areas, potentially implementing different strategies, including managed retreat and relocation. And so next slide. And so we had a lot of different project concept goals and benefits. The ones in blue are the ones that stood out to the group. Things like concentrating on a natural solution versus a hard solution because the beach is important to the community. So acknowledging that. While also developing adaptive pathways that continue to be implemented as sea level rises. So this could include having a concrete plan at the beginning of the project that has maybe passive dune restoration now, but open to developing that project into a hybrid project, or even things like living terraces, seawalls, or retreat, depending on vulnerability over time. Additionally, public access is a really important component of this project. So ensuring that there's continued public access to the beach, and also identifying vulnerable communities that may need to be relocated in the future, and scoping out potential options of what this means, like the receiving communities. How is the funding strategy going to work? Are there going to be buyout options? Just really quick before we move to the next slide, some of the curveball here are shown in green, some of our responses, and we decided really emphasizing on hazard reduction and developing job strategies would be a good tactic to address this curveball, which people thought we have experienced in the past, maybe over time. And then also some input from our different role-playing folks. We had a state member saying that are the plans and actions in the project mentioned in state and local plans, and do we have technical capacity to implement this project? Also talking about permit feasibility. And also from a local planner perspective, what would be the revenue opportunities with this? Would this increase revenue by protecting our beaches? And so let's go to the next slide to go through some of the detail strategies. We had a lot of talk about engagement and partnership, especially because the economy is a service-driven economy supported by a large undocumented population, working with non-governmental organizations on the ground, having community leads or organizations. We did think that the city would be an appropriate lead for this project. But also in blue, you can see that a big focus was building community capacity and creating a community-driven process to define adaptation strategies, design the project to incorporate community values while balancing multiple benefits. And then there's a ton of other potential engagement strategies here. In the orange, these are like input from role-playing. And so things like how are community members compensated? You know, people have jobs and have childcare, being respectful of people's time, making it easier for them to participate. And also thinking about the adaptation strategy, that we don't fall into a trap of implementing short-term solutions that don't make a lot of sense long-term. Also having education and outreach beyond the community workshop meetings. So for funding and financing, we had the Coastal Conservancy, NOAA, and Caltrans in our group. And so I think they've all committed to funding this. But we did say that we need like a local push for city support, that we could potentially build the project out in stages and prioritize different stages with the community, more state and federal bills to create funding sources, and also in the green there, that was kind of our curveball approach, communicate the project as an economic development project that considers sea level rise and hazard reduction. For monitoring and evaluation, we said, yes, we need to monitor and evaluate. There's a lot of different ways, but one particular was creating a comprehensive monitoring plan to kind of match up whether the project meets the goals. This was also an important component from the funders. And also that if we are looking at different types of adaptation strategies over time, how are we monitoring trigger points to implement those different strategies? And the funders also noted that transferability was really important. They didn't want a one-off project. They wanted a project that could be replicated and had a really strong community engagement aspect. And I think that's it. So much information.
Thanks, Melody, and thanks, everyone. I will say Ben, Melody, and Ignacio and I had a lot of fun like thinking through this exercise. Hopefully folks found it worthwhile and engaging, informative. So just want to thank everyone again for joining us today. We will be sharing the main session recording, main session notes, and the Jamboards as part of follow-up next week. And then hopefully you can join us for the final workshop for this track before we have our outcomes focused webinar. That's going to be Thursday, September 30th from 1 to 3 p.m. Heads up, we're dealing with some Google Calendar issues here at LGC, so we haven't been able to, I think for that workshop, we haven't been able to send calendar invitations, but stay tuned. We're trying to resolve that, so hopefully it'll land in your inbox very soon. Ignacio, Ben, Melody, anything else to share before we wrap up? Close out?
No, thank you again. It was very fun to be with everyone, exchange of ideas. So we have a lot to go over until the next meeting too. So.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, y'all. We'll see you.